My name is Ibrahim Traore. I serve as the president of Burkina Faso, but before I am a president, I am a man who believes in God. I was raised to respect faith, whether expressed in a mosque, a church, or beneath the open sky of the Sahel. I have walked with Muslims, Christians, and traditional believers, and I have seen that sincere prayer sounds the same in every language. I speak now not as a politician seeking approval, but as a man who experienced something I cannot ignore. That evening I had finished a long day of meetings, security briefings, reports about instability, conversations about food, defense, and the future of our young people. My body was exhausted, but my mind would not rest. I was still wearing my military uniform when I leaned forward over my desk. Fatigue overcame me. I did not intend to sleep, yet I slipped into it suddenly, as if pulled beneath still water. What followed was not an ordinary dream. I have known ordinary dreams. This was different. In that moment, I felt as though I had crossed into a place beyond time. There was no confusion, no distortion, no chaos as in normal dreams. Instead, there was clarity, there was awareness. I knew who I was, I knew where I had come from, and yet I also sensed that I was standing in a realm not bound by the limits of this world. I believe what I experienced was a revelation. I understand that such words must be spoken carefully. Many leaders speak loudly, many claim visions. I do not make such claims lightly. I am a soldier. I deal with facts, terrain, and consequences. Yet what I saw that night was not imagination shaped by fatigue, it was something deeper. It came at a time when Africa stands at a crossroads. Our continent is awakening, yet it is also being tested. Our young population is full of energy, yet our nations still struggle with dependency, division, and outside pressure. As a leader, I carry the weight of these realities daily. Perhaps that is why the experience came when it did. In that place beyond time, I encountered something that changed me. What I saw was not only about Burkina Faso, it was about Africa. It was about faith. It was about the responsibility of leadership before God. And it began in a landscape that felt like heaven. When I opened my eyes in that realm, I was no longer in my office. I was standing in a vast expanse that did not resemble any place I have known on earth. There was no ceiling above me, yet it was not open sky as we understand it. There was no visible sun, and yet everything was filled with light. It was not harsh light. It did not blind or burn. It surrounded me gently, as if the air itself carried illumination. There were no shadows. Every detail was visible, yet nothing felt exposed. It was a light that comforted rather than interrogated. The sky, if I can call it that, had no clear source. There was brightness without a sun, clarity without glare. It was as though the very atmosphere was alive with presence. I listened. There was a sound like water flowing somewhere in the distance. Not the roar of a river in flood, but the steady, peaceful movement of a stream. Beneath that sound, faint but unmistakable, there was something like a choir. Not voices singing words, but tones. Harmonies. A distant chorus that seemed to breathe rather than perform. It did not feel staged. It felt eternal. There was no fear in that place. I have stood in combat zones. I know what tension feels like. I know the instinct of alertness that never fully sleeps in a soldier. Yet in that place, every trace of anxiety left me. The weight I had carried all day was gone. The fatigue that had pressed against my bones disappeared. I felt light, strong, and alert. I looked down at myself. I was still wearing my military uniform, but it was different. It was clean beyond ordinary cleanliness. The fabric looked brighter, almost luminous, yet not in a dramatic way. It was simply pure, untouched by dust, sweat, or strain. I felt no burden in wearing it. It did not represent conflict in that place. It represented service. I understood something without being told. This was not a random dream formed from exhaustion. My mind was clear. My senses were sharper than in waking life. I was fully aware of who I was. I was fully aware that I had responsibilities waiting in the world I had left behind. And yet time itself seemed suspended. There was no sense of urgency, no ticking clock, no forward movement or backward memory. It was as if I stood in a moment that did not pass. In our world, time pushes us constantly. Decisions must be made quickly, problems escalate, opportunities disappear. But in that place, time did not threaten. It simply existed, still and obedient. I began to walk. The ground beneath me felt solid, but it did not resemble soil or stone. It had no roughness, no dust. It was firm yet gentle beneath my steps. I did not feel the heaviness of gravity as I normally do, yet I was not floating. Everything was balanced. As I moved forward, I realized that the peace surrounding me was not empty peace. It was full of presence, full of awareness. It was as though the very air carried meaning. There were no buildings, no trees that I could clearly identify, no architecture of human design, and yet the place did not feel barren, it felt complete. I cannot say how long I walked. Perhaps seconds, perhaps longer. Time did not behave as it does in our world. But as I moved deeper into that radiant expanse, I became aware that I was not alone. I did not see anyone at first. I felt a presence before I saw a form. It was not threatening, it was not abrupt, it was steady and intentional. I stopped walking. The sound of distant water continued. The faint harmony remained in the air. But now there was something more. A stillness within the stillness, a focus. Then I saw him. But before I speak of that moment, I must explain something clearly. This place, this landscape, was not designed to impress me with power. It was designed to prepare me to listen. It stripped away fear, it removed exhaustion, it silenced distraction. It made me receptive. In leadership, we are surrounded by noise, advisors, critics, allies, enemies, media, rumors, urgent crises. We are rarely in silence. In that place, silence was not emptiness, it was readiness. I believe now that the environment itself was part of the message. Before any words were spoken, I was shown what true peace feels like. Not the fragile peace negotiated between governments, not the temporary peace that follows a ceasefire, but a peace that exists independent of circumstance. Africa longs for peace. The Sahel longs for stability. Communities long for safety. Families long for certainty. Yet what I experienced was a reminder that peace must begin in the heart before it can be sustained in a nation. In that radiant stillness, I understood that whatever message would follow would not be rooted in fear. It would not be rooted in anger. It would not be rooted in revenge. It would be rooted in truth. And I stood there aware that I was about to receive something that would change how I see my role, my continent, and my responsibility before God. The landscape itself was the first lesson. Before awakening comes clarity. Before leadership comes humility. Before action comes stillness. That was the foundation. The core message of this first scene was simple but profound. Peace is real, and it does not come from power alone. It comes from alignment with truth. I stood in that alignment, and then I saw Jesus. When I turned, I did not see a sudden flash. There was no thunder, no overwhelming explosion of sound, no dramatic display meant to frighten or overpower me. His presence revealed itself the way dawn reveals the morning, steadily, undeniably. He stood at a distance at first. Light surrounded him, but it was not a light that hid his form. It outlined him. It clarified him. It made his presence unmistakable, without making it unbearable to look at. His face was both strong and gentle. There was authority there, not the authority of rank, not the authority of position, but the authority of truth. It was the kind of authority that does not need to shout. It simply stands, and everything else aligns around it. His eyes held mine. I have faced leaders, I have faced soldiers, I have faced opposition. I know what it is to look into the eyes of someone measuring strength. This was not that. His gaze did not measure me. It understood me. There was seriousness in his expression, but it was not cold. It was compassionate. It was the seriousness of someone who knows the weight of what must be done and still chooses love. He stepped closer. Each movement was calm, deliberate. There was no rush, no theatrical gesture. The atmosphere did not shift violently. It deepened. When he spoke, his voice did not echo across the landscape like a public address system. It was not loud, yet it reached into me more deeply than any shouted command ever could. It was a voice that did not need volume to carry power. Ibrahim, he said. He called me by name. Not by title, not by rank, not by position, by name. In that moment, I understood something essential. Before I am president, before I am commander, before I am anything else in public life, I am a man known personally by God. His voice carried both firmness and warmth. There was no flattery, no praise meant to elevate my ego. There was clarity. He spoke in a way that made every word feel anchored in truth. He stepped closer still. The light around him did not blind me. It did not force me to lower my eyes. I could look at him directly. That, in itself, was a mercy. He raised his hand and placed it on my shoulder. I cannot fully describe what happened in that touch. Every tension I did not realize I carried dissolved. Every fear about the future of my country, every anxiety about enemies, every burden of responsibility that weighs on a leader's mind vanished in an instant. Not because the problems disappeared, but because I felt understood beyond them. His hand did not press down heavily. It rested with assurance. It communicated something without words. You are not alone. Authority radiated from him, but it was not the authority of domination, it was the authority of love aligned with justice. In our world, power often seeks control. It demands submission. It enforces obedience. But the authority I felt from him did not diminish me. It clarified me. He did not come to command me as a ruler commands a subordinate. He came to speak truth as a shepherd speaks to someone entrusted with part of the flock. I have shown you peace, he said. Now I will show you what is coming. His words were direct. There was no metaphor at first, no symbolism, just clarity. He turned slightly, and the landscape before us shifted not violently, but as if layers of reality were gently peeled back. The radiant stillness remained, but within it images began to form. Before the visions appeared clearly, he spoke again. Authority without love becomes oppression. Love without courage becomes weakness. You must understand both. Those words settled into me. In leadership, we are constantly balancing strength and compassion. Too much force and we become feared but not respected. Too much softness and we become admired but ineffective. His words cut through the confusion of that balance. Then he looked at me with deeper intensity. You were not chosen because you are the strongest, he said quietly. You were chosen because you are willing. I did not argue. I did not protest. I knew my limitations. I know that I am not perfect. I know the mistakes of my continent's history. I know the complexity of modern geopolitics. Strength alone is never enough. Willingness matters. Willingness to listen. Willingness to stand firm. Willingness to sacrifice comfort for responsibility. In that moment, I felt no pride. I felt responsibility. He removed his hand from my shoulder, but the peace remained. You will see three futures, he said. They are not separate, they are connected, and what is chosen will depend on the hearts of the people. His gaze did not shift away from me as he spoke. I do not force nations, I reveal paths. Those words struck me deeply. We often speak as though destiny is fixed, as though history is inevitable. But what I understood in that moment was different. The future is shaped by choices, collective choices rooted in character. Then the first vision began to unfold before us. But before it fully formed, I want to pause and speak directly to those listening, especially those in America, in the United Kingdom, and across the world who have lived long enough to see cycles of rise and decline. What I experienced was not about elevating one nation above another. It was not about declaring superiority. It was about responsibility. Africa stands at a moment in history that will shape not only our continent, but the global balance of moral leadership. The voice of Jesus in that place did not speak of revenge. It did not speak of conquest. It spoke of awakening. The authority I saw in him was not rooted in politics. It was rooted in truth. And that truth was about to reveal three paths. The core message of this second scene was this. True authority comes from love aligned with courage, and leadership is not about being the strongest, but about being willing to stand for truth. I stood there, ready to see what he would show me first. The light before us shifted again. It did not disappear. It transformed. What had been a boundless expanse of stillness now opened into movement. I saw land stretching across horizons. I recognized instinctively the red soil of the Sahel, the wide plains, the rivers that cut through nations without regard for colonial borders, the coastline where waves met a continent long misunderstood. But this Africa was not wounded. It was rising. I saw cities, but not cities built to imitate others. They were modern, yet unmistakably African. Architecture reflected our history and our climate. Solar panels stretched across rooftops like shields of light. Wind turbines turned slowly in desert corridors where once only dust moved. Energy flowed from within the continent. We were no longer waiting for approval to power our own homes. I saw grids that connected villages to cities. I saw rural communities lit at night without the hum of foreign dependency. Our resources were no longer shipped out in raw form, while we imported finished products at higher cost. Processing plants stood near mines. Refineries stood near oil fields. Technology centers rose near universities. I saw young men and women seated in classrooms filled with instruments, models, and digital screens. They were not memorizing foreign dependence. They were studying engineering, cybersecurity, agricultural science, and defense strategy. Their faces were focused. Their instructors were African. Some had studied abroad and returned. Others had never left, but had gained access to tools once unavailable. I saw laboratories funded not by outside conditions, but by continental cooperation. The image shifted slightly. I saw soldiers, but they were not standing under foreign command. They were disciplined, trained, and equipped through partnerships built on mutual respect. Defense was no longer a borrowed concept. It was owned. I saw leaders standing before their people. They did not speak with desperation. They did not beg for aid. They spoke of policy, sovereignty, accountability. They were not perfect, but they were firm. The air in this vision carried confidence, not arrogance, confidence. I felt something rise in my chest as I watched. It was not pride in myself, it was recognition. I was seeing potential that has long existed in Africa, but has often been suppressed, distorted, or divided. Then Jesus spoke. Tell them not to fear standing up. His voice carried weight but not threat. I watched as scenes continued unfolding. A young entrepreneur refused a contract that would strip her country of long-term value. A minister rejected a corrupt payment. A regional alliance formed to negotiate as one rather than as fragmented states. There was resistance in the vision. I saw pressure from outside powers. I saw media narratives attempting to portray independence as instability. I saw economic threats. But I also saw something stronger. A shift in mindset. For generations, Africa has often been described through the lens of victimhood. Colonized, exploited, undermined. Those facts are real. History cannot be erased. But in the vision, I saw something different. I saw a continent refusing to define itself only by its wounds. Jesus turned toward me slightly. The first chain that must break is fear, he said. Fear of economic retaliation, fear of isolation, fear of criticism, fear of standing alone. Yet in the vision, Africa was not alone. I saw intracontinental trade increasing, rail lines connecting landlocked nations to ports controlled by African partnerships, digital networks linking research institutions from West Africa to East Africa. Young people were no longer dreaming only of departure. They were dreaming of building. I saw a classroom where a teacher told students, "You are not behind, you are at the beginning." I saw farmers using modern irrigation systems designed locally. I saw defense analysts discussing strategy in African languages, not as translation but as origin. Then I saw something subtle but powerful. I saw elders sitting beneath trees in rural communities, speaking with younger leaders. Wisdom was not discarded. Tradition was not mocked. It was integrated. Modernity did not erase identity. In that moment, I understood something clearly. Awakening is not rebellion for the sake of rebellion. It is alignment with dignity. Jesus spoke again. Strength without resentment, he said. Independence without hatred. Those words struck deeply. Africa awakening does not require hostility toward the West. It does not require bitterness toward former powers. It requires clarity about self-worth. In the vision, I saw partnerships with nations outside Africa, including America and the United Kingdom. But these partnerships were different. They were negotiated from strength. Agreements were balanced. Respect was mutual. No one begged. No one dominated. Then the vision narrowed. I saw a young officer standing at a podium. He was not me, yet he represented something familiar. He spoke not of revolution, but of responsibility. He spoke of building institutions that would outlast individuals. Behind him stood a flag, not as decoration, but as covenant. Jesus looked at me directly. Tell them not to fear standing up, he repeated. I realized that the message was not only for presidents. It was for teachers, engineers, parents, clergy, and soldiers. Standing up does not always mean confrontation. Sometimes it means refusing corruption quietly. Sometimes it means returning home to invest. Sometimes it means teaching children that they are capable. Fear keeps nations small, even when they are large in resources. Fear convinces leaders to compromise values for temporary stability. Fear persuades citizens that nothing can change. In the vision, fear was shrinking. Courage was rising. I felt both inspired and cautious. I have seen hopeful movements before that were later undermined by ego or division. I wondered whether this awakening could endure. As if sensing my thoughts, Jesus spoke once more. Awakening begins in the heart. It survives through discipline. The vision slowly dimmed, but not into darkness. It returned to the radiant stillness of the original landscape. I understood that this was only the first of three. The core message of this first vision was clear. Africa must awaken from fear and reclaim responsibility for its own destiny. Sovereignty is not aggression. It is maturity. I stood there, aware that awakening alone would not be enough. The next vision began to form. The light shifted again. The confidence I had just witnessed did not disappear, but it was challenged. The vision before me darkened slightly, not into chaos, but into tension. I could feel instability moving beneath the surface like a fault line. I saw the same cities I had seen rising, but now there were protests in the streets. Not all were peaceful, not all were honest. Some were driven by real grievances, others were fueled by misinformation. I saw social media streams flooding with conflicting narratives, images manipulated, statements twisted, voices amplified not for truth, but for division. Jesus stood beside me in silence as the scenes unfolded. I saw foreign influence operating quietly. Not always through armies, but through funding, digital campaigns, and subtle pressure. Economic levers were pulled. Trade agreements were delayed. Loans were threatened. Aid was conditioned. Not openly. Strategically, I saw political leaders across Africa facing pressure from within and without. Some stood firm, others hesitated, a few gave in. Then I saw something that troubled me deeply. I saw citizens turning on one another. Tribal language resurfaced in ways that reopened old wounds. Religious differences were manipulated. Suspicion spread faster than facts. Trust eroded. A pastor questioned a Muslim leader publicly, not out of theological debate, but out of political alignment. A cleric responded with defensiveness. Their communities mirrored their tone. In another scene, two neighboring nations accused each other of betrayal over trade routes and security alliances. Rumors spread faster than clarification. Cooperation weakened. Jesus spoke quietly. The greatest threat is not outside. I knew what he meant before he finished. It is division within. The vision sharpened. I saw a young man scrolling through his phone late at night, absorbing anger from voices he had never met. I saw an elder shaking his head in frustration, convinced that the younger generation was lost. I saw a soldier doubting his leadership because of conflicting reports. The test was not only economic, it was moral. In the vision, I saw corruption attempting to return in new forms. It was more subtle than before. It did not present itself openly as theft. It disguised itself as compromise for stability, as temporary flexibility, as strategic adjustment. I recognize that temptation. Leaders often justify small compromises in the name of national security or economic necessity. But small compromises accumulate. They alter character. Jesus turned to me. Teach them unity, he said. His voice did not carry frustration, it carried urgency. Unity does not mean uniformity. It does not mean erasing difference. Africa is diverse by design, languages, traditions, beliefs. That diversity is strength when rooted in mutual respect. But division becomes deadly when identity is weaponized. The vision continued. I saw an attempt to destabilize an African government through narrative warfare. Headlines appeared internationally questioning legitimacy. Experts debated motives without understanding context. Investors hesitated. Citizens worried. Some reacted with anger, others with fear. A few responded with patience and transparency. I saw a meeting of religious leaders from different faiths sitting at one table. Their dialogue was calm, even when disagreements surfaced. They recognized that if they fractured publicly, others would exploit that fracture. Jesus spoke again. Unity must be taught intentionally. It does not arise automatically in times of pressure. I saw classrooms where children were taught not only science and mathematics, but civic responsibility. They learned about shared history, not only painful chapters, but shared resilience. I saw media platforms emerging within Africa that valued investigative truth rather than sensationalism. Journalists who understood the weight of words, but I also saw the danger. If unity failed, the awakening I had seen in the first vision would collapse. Investment would withdraw, young people would lose faith, cynicism would replace courage. Then I saw a powerful image, a rope woven from many strands. Each strand represented a different region, tribe, religion, and language. Individually, each strand could break under tension, but woven together, they held firm. Jesus looked at me again. Tell them the enemy thrives on fracture. His words were simple. I felt the gravity of them. Africa's history contains examples of division exploited, borders drawn without consent, conflicts inflamed from afar, promises broken, resources extracted. But the vision was not blaming external forces alone. It was reminding me that internal distrust gives external pressure power. In another scene, I saw a heated parliamentary debate. Voices were raised, accusations flew, yet eventually, a senior member stood and reminded the assembly of shared purpose. The tone shifted, not perfectly, not instantly, but enough. Unity requires maturity. It requires leaders willing to absorb criticism without retaliating destructively. It requires citizens willing to verify before sharing. It requires faith communities willing to protect one another's dignity even when beliefs differ. Jesus placed his hand lightly over his heart. Teach them to guard this first, he said. Unity is not only political alignment, it is emotional discipline. I thought of the Sahel. The instability we face is complex. Terrorism, poverty, climate pressures, external interests. But beneath all of it lies a test of cohesion. Can communities trust one another long enough to build? The vision began to soften. Before it faded, I saw one final image. A group of young Africans from different countries standing together, not in protest, but in collaboration. They were building something. An infrastructure project that required cross-border coordination. Their laughter carried hope. The test had not disappeared, but they had chosen cooperation. The light returned to its earlier brilliance. The core message of this second vision was clear. The greatest danger to Africa's future is internal division. Unity must be cultivated deliberately, especially under pressure. Awakening without unity collapses. Strength without cohesion fractures. I stood once more in the radiant stillness, aware that the third vision would reveal the outcome of choices made between courage and division. The light did not dim this time. It intensified, not in a way that overwhelmed the senses, but in a way that signaled fulfillment. The atmosphere carried both peace and motion, as if something long promised had finally taken form. Before me, Africa stood transformed, not erased, not redesigned to resemble another civilization, transformed from within. I saw cities rising higher than before, but they did not look like borrowed copies of foreign skylines. They reflected climate, culture, and history. Glass and steel stood beside patterns inspired by ancient design. Technology blended with tradition rather than replacing it. Children walked through streets that were clean and secure. They were not rushing to escape poverty. They were carrying books, laughing freely. I saw schools equipped with laboratories, libraries, and digital networks connecting them across the continent. Hunger was not visible. I searched the streets instinctively for signs of suffering, but I did not see children begging at traffic intersections. I did not see mothers choosing between food and medicine. The systems in place were not perfect, but they functioned. Agriculture had evolved. Farmers used modern methods developed by African researchers who understood local soil and climate. Food moved efficiently across borders without bureaucratic obstruction. Trade within the continent had strengthened economies that once relied almost entirely on exports to distant powers. I saw rail lines connecting inland regions to coastal ports, not merely for extraction, but for balanced exchange. I saw defense institutions that were strong yet disciplined. They did not dominate civilian life, they protected it. Stability was no longer fragile, it was structured. Then I saw something unexpected. Leaders from different African nations stood together before international assemblies. Their tone was not defensive, it was steady. They spoke not only of economic policy, but of ethical responsibility. Africa had become a moral voice, not because it claimed superiority, but because it had learned from suffering. It had known exploitation. It had experienced division, and it had chosen integrity. Jesus stood beside me as I absorbed the scene. "This is possible," he said. His words were not dramatic. They were factual. In the vision, I saw partnerships with nations across the world, America, the United Kingdom, Europe, Asia, but the relationships were balanced. Africa did not approach as a dependent, it approached as an equal. I saw global leaders listening when African representatives spoke about climate, food security, and conflict resolution. The continent that had once been described primarily through crisis was now consulted for wisdom. I felt something within me shift from hope to responsibility. This vision was not a fantasy, it was conditional. Jesus turned to me fully. "Remind them," he said, "that strength must walk with compassion." The scene deepened. I saw a powerful African corporation choosing not to exploit weaker neighboring economies. I saw a government refusing to silence critics through force, choosing dialogue instead. I saw a wealthy businessman funding rural education not for image, but for legacy. Prosperity had not erased character. In fact, character had sustained prosperity. Then I saw something that moved me deeply. I saw Christian and Muslim leaders standing together at a public gathering. They were not blending their doctrines, they were respecting one another openly. Their communities mirrored that respect. Faith had not been weaponized, it had been purified. In another scene, I saw an African peacekeeping delegation mediating conflict in another region of the world, not as enforcers but as facilitators. The continent once characterized by internal instability was now contributing to global stability. Jesus looked toward the horizon. "If power forgets mercy," he said, "this will not last." His words carried both promise and warning. I saw a brief flicker in the vision, a reminder that prosperity can breed arrogance, that growth can lead to pride, that leaders can begin to believe they are the source rather than the steward of success. The glorious Africa I saw was not proud. It was confident and humble. Children were taught history honestly, including mistakes. Leaders were held accountable through functioning institutions. The press was free but responsible. Religious leaders preached conviction without inciting hatred. Then the vision narrowed to one intimate moment. A young girl stood on a stage receiving an award for innovation in renewable energy design. She thanked her teachers, her parents, and her nation. Her words were simple. We build because we were taught we are capable. That sentence echoed through me. Capability had replaced dependency. Jesus stepped slightly closer. This is the fruit, he said, when courage and unity remain guided by conscience. I understood then that the three visions were not separate timelines. They were stages: awakening, testing, glory. Each depended on the choices made in the previous stage. Africa Glorious was not about dominance, it was about balance. Modern cities that did not abandon culture. Strong defense that did not suppress citizens. Economic growth that did not sacrifice integrity. Faith communities that strengthened moral life rather than dividing it. The light began to settle back into the original radiant stillness. Before the vision fully closed, I saw one final image. An elderly man sitting in a quiet courtyard in another part of the world, perhaps in America, perhaps in Britain, watching news from Africa. His expression was thoughtful, not dismissive. He nodded slowly, as if recognizing something long overdue. The transformation of Africa had influenced how the world saw itself. Then the vision faded. I stood again in that timeless landscape, aware that what I had seen was both possible and fragile. The core message of this third vision was clear. Prosperity without morality collapses. Strength without compassion corrupts. Africa's rise must be anchored in conscience, or it will not endure. I felt the weight of what I had witnessed. But Jesus was not finished speaking. When the final vision faded, the landscape returned to its original stillness. The flowing sound of distant water remained, the faint harmony lingered in the air, the light was steady, unchanged. It was as if the three visions had passed like chapters within a book, but the author had not yet closed it. Jesus turned fully toward me. There were no more sweeping images unfolding before us, no cities, no crowds, no nations. It was now only him and me. His gaze softened, though it did not lose its seriousness. Ibrahim, he said again. The way he spoke my name carried familiarity, not political familiarity, not public recognition, personal knowledge. You are not chosen because you are strong, he said. The words were calm, but they went straight through me. You are chosen because you are willing. In leadership, strength is often celebrated, decisiveness, boldness, endurance. We are praised when we appear unshaken, but in that moment, I understood something deeper. Willingness is not weakness. Willingness means listening when it is uncomfortable. It means standing firm when compromise would be easier. It means admitting mistakes. It means being open to correction. Strength can be displayed outwardly. Willingness is tested inwardly. I thought of my own limitations. I thought of the pressures that surround any head of state, the expectations, the criticism, the constant evaluation from inside and outside the nation. I am not unaware of my imperfections. And yet he did not speak to me about perfection. He spoke about willingness. To be willing is to remain teachable, he continued. In that moment, I felt both humbled and strengthened. Humbled because I knew I am not the source of vision. Strengthened because I understood that obedience to truth is more important than appearing powerful. Then he added something that settled deeply in my heart. Do not carry what is mine to carry. For a moment, I did not fully grasp what he meant. Then I understood. As leaders, we often try to control outcomes that are beyond our authority. We feel responsible for every result, every crisis, every failure. We take on burdens that were never meant for human shoulders. Responsibility is necessary, but control is illusion. You are responsible for your obedience, he said, not for every outcome. Those words released something inside me. I realized that my task is not to guarantee the future of Africa. It is to align my leadership with truth, courage, and compassion. The rest is shaped by collective choices. Then his expression grew more solemn. Many will misunderstand you, he said. That did not surprise me. Some will accuse you falsely. Some will praise you excessively. Neither must define you. Praise can distort as much as criticism. If a leader begins to believe the praise, pride grows. If a leader begins to fear criticism, courage shrinks. Remain steady, he said. The simplicity of that instruction carried more weight than complex strategies. Remain steady in principle. Remain steady in justice. Remain steady in humility. Then he did something unexpected. He stepped closer again and placed his hand once more on my shoulder. The peace returned with renewed intensity. But this time, it carried something additional, a quiet resolve. You are not alone in this, he said. I understood that he was not speaking only to me as an individual. He was speaking to any leader who chooses conscience over convenience. The personal moment was not about elevating me above others, it was about anchoring me in responsibility without ego. In that stillness, I felt gratitude more than fear. I did not ask questions. I did not request clarification about timelines or specific events. The message was clear enough. Awaken courage. Teach unity. Guard morality. Remain willing. Then the atmosphere shifted slightly again. The peace did not disappear, but a shadow of seriousness crossed the horizon of light. There is one more thing, he said. The tone changed not into threat, but into warning. The final scene began to form. The core message of this personal moment was this. Leadership is not about strength alone, but about willingness to remain obedient to truth, steady in principle, and humble under both praise and criticism. I stood prepared to see what the final warning would reveal. When he said there was one more thing, the light did not vanish, but it thinned. Not into darkness, not into terror, but into clarity sharpened by consequence. Before us, the radiant landscape remained, yet within it a final sequence unfolded. This one was shorter, it moved quickly, it did not linger on beauty. I saw Africa again. Not awakened, not glorious. I saw it forgetting. The image began with small compromises. A leader who once spoke of integrity quietly accepted a favor in exchange for silence. He justified it as necessary for stability. He told himself it was temporary. A business figure who had built wealth ethically began cutting corners, telling himself that growth required flexibility. A religious leader allowed political allegiance to shape sermons more than scripture. The changes were subtle at first. No riots, no visible collapse, just a slow shift in priority. Jesus did not speak immediately. He allowed me to watch. I saw corruption return, not as crude theft, but as sophisticated manipulation, contracts written in complex language that favored a few. Decisions made behind closed doors without transparency. Then I saw something more painful. I saw faith fading, not publicly abandoned, but privately neglected. Prayer replaced by performance, worship replaced by ambition. Leaders who once sought guidance began trusting only strategy. Communities became restless. When faith weakens, trust weakens. When trust weakens, unity fractures. I saw young people losing belief not only in religion but in leadership itself. Cynicism grew. They are all the same, some said. Division returned. Tribal suspicion resurfaced. Political rivals exploited grievances. External pressures found open doors because internal discipline had loosened. The image accelerated. Economic growth slowed. Investors hesitated. Security forces were stretched thin. Citizens protested, not because they hated their nations, but because they felt betrayed. Jesus finally spoke. If they forget faith, if they repeat corruption, if power replaces justice, the glory will fade. His voice was steady. There was no anger in it, only truth. I saw the cities from the third vision dim slightly. Infrastructure neglected, institutions weakened by favoritism, international respect declined. Not overnight, gradually. Prosperity built over years can erode through complacency. The warning was not about punishment from heaven in dramatic form. It was about consequence woven into reality. When moral foundations weaken, systems eventually collapse under their own imbalance. Then I saw something that pierced deeply. I saw a child looking at a flag with confusion rather than pride. The symbol meant little because integrity behind it had thinned. Jesus turned toward me. Remind them, he said again. The repetition carried urgency. The future is not guaranteed by potential. It is preserved by character. The final warning was not designed to frighten, it was designed to awaken vigilance. Africa does not need to fear external dominance as much as it must guard internal decay. Faith is not merely ritual, it is alignment with truth. Justice is not merely policy, it is moral consistency. Power is not merely authority, it is stewardship. If stewardship becomes entitlement, decline begins. The shadowed vision faded. The radiant landscape returned fully, the peace remained intact, the distant harmony continued as if nothing had interrupted it. I understood then that the warning was not separate from hope, it was part of it. Hope without caution becomes naive. Caution without hope becomes despair. The message required both. Jesus looked at me one final time in that realm beyond time. Tell them, he said quietly, time is not endless. There was no clock, no countdown, but the weight of urgency settled into me. The experience began to close. The light did not snap off. It gently receded. The sound of water softened, the distant harmonies faded into silence. I felt gravity return. Weight returned to my body. The firmness of a desk beneath my arms came back into awareness. I opened my eyes. I was still in my office, still in my military uniform, but sweat covered my forehead. My breathing was heavier than when I had fallen asleep. The final words echoed in my mind clearly. Tell them, time is not endless. The core message of this final warning was this: a continent can rise, but without faith, integrity, and justice, it can fall again. The preservation of glory requires constant moral discipline. The vision had ended, but the responsibility had begun. When I opened my eyes in my office, the room was silent. The reports were still on my desk. The same documents about security, energy, education, and diplomacy. Nothing in the physical world had changed. And yet everything within me had shifted. I remained seated for several minutes without moving. The uniform on my body felt heavier than before, but not as a burden. It felt like responsibility renewed. The sweat on my forehead reminded me that what I had experienced was not distant imagination. It had touched me deeply. I knew I could not keep it to myself. I speak now to Muslims, to Christians, to traditional believers across Africa, to leaders in the Sahel, to elders in America and Britain who have watched nations rise and fall. I speak not to persuade you emotionally, but to share what I witnessed and what I believe it means. Africa stands at a turning point. We are rich in youth, in land, in resources, in culture, but resources alone do not create destiny. Character does. The first message I received was about courage. We must not fear standing up. Standing up does not mean hostility, it means maturity. It means negotiating with dignity. It means building our own institutions rather than depending permanently on others to define our progress. To my fellow Africans, I say this: we must release the mindset of permanent victimhood. History has wounded us, yes, but history does not have the right to imprison our future. To the global community, I say this: Africa's awakening is not a threat. It is a contribution. A continent stable and confident strengthens the world. The second message was about unity. Our greatest danger is not only external pressure, it is internal division. If we allow tribe, religion, language, or political loyalty to fracture us beyond repair, we will weaken ourselves more effectively than any foreign influence ever could. To my Muslim brothers and sisters, I say, protect justice and mercy. To my Christian brothers and sisters, I say, protect humility and love. To all faith communities, I say, do not allow faith to become a weapon for political gain. When religion becomes a tool of ambition, both religion and politics are corrupted. Unity does not require uniformity. We will disagree, we will debate, but we must not dehumanize one another. The third message was about morality and strength. If Africa rises economically but loses conscience, our rise will not endure. If our cities become modern but our institutions become corrupt, we will repeat old cycles under new names. Prosperity must walk with compassion. Security must walk with justice. Leadership must walk with humility. I was told clearly that I was not chosen because I am strong, but because I am willing. That truth applies beyond me. Nations are not sustained by appearing powerful. They are sustained by remaining teachable. To leaders across Africa and the Sahel, I say this: do not believe your own praise. Do not be paralyzed by criticism. Remain steady in principle. Admit mistakes when necessary. Guard against the slow return of corruption disguised as compromise. To leaders outside Africa, especially those in America and the United Kingdom who carry long histories of influence, I say this: partnership rooted in respect will endure longer than dominance rooted in leverage. The world is shifting. Stability requires humility on all sides. The final warning remains with me strongly. If we forget faith, not ritual, but genuine reverence for truth, if we allow corruption to return in sophisticated form, if power begins to replace justice, then whatever progress we make will fade. Time is not endless. We do not control the length of opportunity given to a generation. We control how we use it. To the elders listening who have seen decades of change, I ask you to speak wisdom to younger generations without bitterness. To the young listening, I ask you to pursue innovation without arrogance. Africa's destiny is not written by one man. It is shaped by millions of daily choices. My hope is not only for Africa, it is for the world. May America rediscover humility where it has known influence. May Europe balance history with fairness. May Asia pursue growth without forgetting human dignity. May Africa rise without resentment. May Muslims, Christians, and all believers remember that God is not owned by any nation. He is not confined to any border. The vision I experienced was not about elevating one continent above others. It was about responsibility before God and before history. If you hear these words and sense truth in them, reflect on them, discuss them, pray about them. Do not accept them blindly. Test them in your conscience. If you believe Africa has a greater destiny, speak it with wisdom, not anger. If you believe unity is fragile, protect it actively. If you believe power must serve justice, demand accountability respectfully but firmly. I share this not as propaganda, not as spectacle, but as testimony. And I repeat what must anchor it. I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso, and what I have shared with you comes from what I experienced as truth. I am Ibrahim Traoré, entrusted with the leadership of Burkina Faso, and these words I speak are not invention but conviction shaped by revelation. I am Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, and before God and before you, I affirm that what I have told you is sincere and true. If these words resonate with you, do not let them end as sound alone. Reflect on them, share your thoughts, speak respectfully in discussion. Continue seeking conversations that elevate rather than divide. And wherever you are, whether in the Sahel, in Washington, in London, or in a quiet village, choose courage over fear, unity over division, integrity over corruption. Time is not endless, but hope remains.